Thank you, everyone, for being here for the last session of the program, and we are honored to have speaking for us today Jayant Sinha, who, as most of you know, is a member of Parliament for the Government of India. He's also an entrepreneur, and I think that's what's going to make this session especially interesting, is that he is able to talk to both the government issues that we've been discussing over the last day and a half and then the business and entrepreneurial side of things. So he is going to speak for about 15 minutes, but he's emphasized that the bulk of the session be given over to questions. So please, I hope you will indulge us by having questions ready to ask, and please help me welcome Mr. Sinha.
Thank you very much. It's indeed an honor to be here this afternoon to speak to you all. Whenever I speak at an event like this, I always realize, because it's only been a few short months in my new life as a Lok Sabha member of Parliament, that not so long ago I was sitting where you are sitting, and I was listening to folks, kind of talking about politics and what is happening in India. But I'm very fortunate and privileged now to be a member of Parliament in the Lok Sabha from Hazaribagh, which is where I was born, which is in Jharkhand. Because of my 25 years of experience in the private sector, before I entered public life and entered Parliament, the party has specifically asked me on many different sort of media channels, as well as in conferences, to speak on behalf of the party and the government on economic and policy issues. So I'm very happy and glad to be here for what I know, having been an investor for many years, is a very important conference for India. And given all of that, I thought it would be useful perhaps to just lay out what I see as the landscape and what I see as the opportunities. And it's titled, "What is it that the world can give India? What is it that India can give the world?" So talk a little bit about that, but not spend too much time on it, but leave a lot of time for you all to ask questions, because I'm sure you have a lot of questions you want to ask about the political situation in India. And of course, as they say, there's never a dull moment. We just had the BJP Shiv Sena alliance of 25 years break earlier today. So there's always a lot of things going on as far as politics is concerned. And I want to leave plenty of time for you all to ask me questions. But, on this topic of, what is it that the world can expect and what is it that India should expect from the world, let me start with a bit of a personal story, because I think it's relevant to the topic in a very significant way. When I decided to run for the Lok Sabha, it was quite a strange thing, because you have somebody here like myself who had led a professional life for 25 years and suddenly decided that they wanted to contest an election. And so that attracted a fair bit of media attention, a number of stories were written and so on. And very often I was clubbed with two other people from the corporate sector that were also running for public office. One of them is Meera Sanyal, who, as you know, ran from Mumbai South, and the other was Nandan Nilekani, who's a good friend, and who was running from Bangalore South. And so the Financial Times, I don't know if you ever saw this article, but the Financial Times wrote, in fact, had a cover story on their weekend magazine on how people from the corporate sector were now entering public life. And so James Crabtree, who's the FT correspondent, went to visit Meera and Nandan and then came to visit me in Hazaribagh. And I told him, I said, James, as you write about the other two, remember, my story is the strangest. I said, my story is the strangest because, I've spent most of my life in the corporate sector like Meera and Nandan have, but I spent it in the United States. And I'm running from Hazaribagh, Jharkhand. And if you don't know Jharkhand, it's the poorest, most underdeveloped state in India. And Hazaribagh is right in the middle of that. So it's probably among the poorest places, not just in India, but on the planet. And of course, it's Naxalite infested, so we have a lot of challenges in terms of how you sort of travel around in that area. And I said, when you look at what Meera is doing from Mumbai South and what Nandan is doing from Bangalore South, and you look at the degree of difficulty, at some level, I would argue it's not quite as much. Because, first of all, they're in heavily urban areas. Those are the two most urbanized constituencies out of the 543 in the Lok Sabha. Number two, they've spent their entire professional life in India, whereas I've spent it in the United States, living in Boston and Philadelphia. And number three, most of what they have to do, they can do in English, whereas I have to do everything in Hindi. So I said the degree of difficulty I have to pull off is much more than they have to. But Luckily, I was on the right side of the electoral wave. Of course, I was in the BJP. Meera was running for the Aam Aadmi Party, and Nandan from the Congress. So they both lost. Meera, I don't even think, was able to protect her deposit, which means that she got less than 5 or 10% of the votes. Nandan lost by 2 lakh votes, 200,000 votes, to Anant Kumar from Bangalore South. And as luck would have it, and as Modi ji would have it, I won by 1,59,000 votes, 159,000 votes. So even though I had the highest degree of difficulty, I think I was on the right side of what was happening. And so I'm here in front of you today to talk about politics. But as part of this, there were a number of headlines written. And one of the headlines that people wrote about was for me, because I had obviously had a professional career I had finished my undergraduate degree from IIT Delhi, and then I'd done my MBA from Harvard Business School. So there was a lot of talk at that time for Jayant Sinha from Harvard to Hazaribagh. And so that headline got played around a lot, from Harvard to Hazaribagh. Look at how far he's had to travel, and he's in Hazaribagh and so on. And I always thought they got it wrong. And I think this is the story of India as well, which is why I think this little roundabout story is germane to the topic today. And I think they got it wrong, because the story was not about from Harvard to Hazaribagh. The story was from Hazaribagh to Harvard, because I was born in Hazaribagh. I grew up there, and so obviously I was lucky to get into IIT and then get into Harvard and so on. But that is really the more interesting story. And that is the story of India as well. The story of India is not necessarily that the West has to come to India. The story of what is happening in India right now is that India is going to the West. India is adapting and coming together with what is happening globally. And that is the big story. So let me just sort of lay that out in some more detail. And what do I mean by that? We are all people who study and follow the capital markets very closely and what's happening in the economy. The Indian economy today is a $2 trillion economy. It's a $2 trillion economy. And if indeed we are able to get onto the growth trajectory of 7 or 8%, which is well within our reach, and we've demonstrated much faster growth than that even for a brief period of time. But if we can get to a sustainable 7 to 8% growth rate, and we can achieve that and sustain that for at least 10 years, we go from being a $2 trillion economy to a $4 trillion economy. We double the economy in 10 years. But as we do so, I'm quite confident, particularly with a RBI governor like Dr. Rajan in charge, that the rupee is actually going to strengthen as well. And particularly because of the capital flows and everything we are going to see, I'm quite confident we could have a rupee that's not at 60. In fact, the rupee, if it was allowed to float freely today, would not be at 60. I can assure you what Dr. Rajan and the RBI is doing is building up reserves right now. If indeed we had a free flow to the rupee, we might even be at 55, 56 already. But it's quite possible over a period of time we could get to a point where the rupee is significantly stronger. And therefore we have an opportunity in dollar terms to go from a $2 trillion economy to a $5 trillion economy in 10 years. Somewhere in the 8 to 10, 8 to 12 year range. We're going to have a $5 trillion economy. And what we've seen over time is that market capitalization of the BSE 500 or any index you choose to pick tends to go in line with GDP. So and it is 1:1 with GDP and has been for the last 8 to 10 years. And so if indeed we are able to get to a $5 trillion economy and we maintain this 1:1 ratio, we'll see a situation where the Indian stock market or the market capitalization of Indian companies is going to be $5 trillion, which means that in the next 10 years, we could easily add $3 trillion to the market capitalization of Indian companies. $3 trillion. Now, as you look around and you consider around the world, where are there global investment opportunities where you can add $3 trillion? And this is just in the listed names. If we go into private names, it probably is going to be, substantially, more than that, maybe another $1 trillion or so you could look at. So the wealth creation opportunity in India, I think over the next 10 years, is going to be something that's in the range of $3 trillion. Now, last I checked, a lot of people had not made money in China. So China, of course, has had a very impressive growth rate as well, but it's not clear to me that a lot of people have made money in China. But people have made money in India, and they're continuing to make money in India when they're investing from overseas. So I think in front of us, what we're seeing right now is probably in our lifetimes, particularly for those of us that invest in India, is the most unprecedented and most unique wealth creation opportunity that we're ever going to see in our lifetimes. So that is what I think is ahead of us. And I have tremendous faith in the Prime Minister, having worked closely with him and knowing the party and the political landscape, that we are going to be able to stay in power in 2019 as well, win re-election. And so what we would expect to see is a Prime Minister Modi that rules for at least 10 years, and during these 10 years essentially transforms India. And I'm just giving you the numbers as to what I think is possible. Now, one thing you should all know is that as far as the Prime Minister is concerned, when he thinks about India 10 or 15 years from now, what he has in his mind's eye, the vision that he has for India, is that of something that resembles Japan in a way, a peaceful, prosperous, stable democracy where you are able to create tremendous opportunities for all Indians, and at the same time have a very competitive export-oriented industries as well, like Japan does. So that's really what I think the Prime Minister is working towards. And that's the context within which we have to look at what is it that the world can supply and what is it that India can supply. And as I said before, right at the outset, it's really what India is bringing to the table in some ways. The Hazaribagh to Harvard part of it, that is much more interesting than what the world can provide India. Because if you think about what the world can provide India, it's fairly straightforward. It's very clear. All of us who follow India know what we need and what we're importing right now. What is it that we import? Because we'll need more of that going forward. Well, first and foremost, what we need in India is energy. And of course, we are importing 80% of our oil, 90% of our oil. We will be importing liquid natural gas. But energy is, I think, the number one product or the number one import that we're going to continue to have over the next 10 or 15 years. And that is, I think, something that's going to be very difficult for us to substitute away from. Now, related to the energy point, and the second thing that India really does need from the rest of the world is technology. And not all kinds of technology. I think what Mangalyaan has shown is that as far as certain types of technology is concerned, we are capable of doing whatever the rest of the world can do. So it's not obvious that we need all types of technologies, but particularly for instance, if you look at solar energy, if you look at fracking, all energy related technologies, certain computationally intensive technologies, certain biotech type devices, pharmaceuticals, that's really the kind of technology and IP that we need. And certainly we need that. And I think we'll put in place the right IPR and the right relationships so we can attract that technology. The third thing that we do need, and that's why all of you are so important, of course, is capital. Now, domestic capital is still by far the most important driver of our growth. I think if you look at India's investment rate of about 30% of GDP, if you have a $2 trillion GDP, you're investing about $600 billion a year. The vast majority of that is coming from domestic sources and from our domestic savings. It's not coming from global sources, but at the same time, that capital coupled with technology, coupled with with the world's best management practices and so on, is of vital importance to India, and it is a leading indicator to Indian businesses as well. So capital is the third thing that we need from the world. But as far as I can see, the world is awash in capital. The world is awash in capital. It's low return capital right now that you're seeing around the world, and therefore I think if we can create the right investment opportunities, that capital will come. And those are the three things principally that we need from the rest of the world. Of course, we need peace, but that is not unique. Everybody in the world wants peace. But if we have energy, if we have technology, and we have capital, then we are truly moving in that direction that I said earlier, which is to get to a $5 trillion economy. So in some ways, that part is well known and well understood. Now let me talk to you all about what is it that India can provide the world. And that's less discussed, but I think equally important, if not more important. And that's the Hazaribagh to Harvard part, which is what I started my speech with. So what is it that I think India can do for the world? I think first and foremost, what we are going to see is the start of many different types of industries that only India can do. And I'll explain that in a second, but let me give the analogy with China first. So what China brought to the table when it really integrated with the global economy in a very substantial way was very low cost, very efficient manufacturing. And you see that in Shenzhen, you see that in the big factory cities of China, where lots of industries like furniture making, low-tech assembly and electronics manufacturing, leather, toys, all of these industries were basically swamped by what is called the China price. And that incredible supply boost that China provided in terms of this kind of manufacturing really transformed the world. So that was what China did in terms of what China could do when it integrated with the global economy. What is it that India can do? I think what India is going to do in terms of the industries that we're going to do well in is a different set of industries. We've already seen that in software. We've already seen that in software where India has transformed an industry because of its manufacturing, if you will, from an Indian base. And we are going to see that in many other industries as well, and the Mars orbital Mangalyaan is an example of that. There are going to be many different industries where the combination of low-cost, frugal innovation coupled with the amount of talent and the human capital that we have in India is going to be very, very, I think, important for the global economy. And I'll give you examples of 3 such industries. The first one is actually in medical devices. We've already seen in pharmaceuticals and generic manufacturing that Indian manufacturers, Indian pharmaceuticals can be globally very, very competitive. We're going to see that in medical devices as well. There's a range of medical devices that people are working on right now, which I think are going to really make a big impact on global medical costs. Things like, for example, optometric devices for diagnosing eye problems. Things like much lower cost stents. There are people in India working on lower cost stents that are as good as anything that J&J does, but are at 1/10 the cost. So in medical devices, one industry where I think we can do a lot of very interesting things. The second area I think that we're going to show a lot of very interesting innovation in is in what I would call rooftop solar. I sit on the board of a company called D-Light, which is already manufacturing in some ways the most cost-effective and the most innovative rooftop solar systems. A lot of that design and engineering is happening in India. And it's coming out of India, this type of distributed solar, and it's going to places like Haiti and elsewhere where they also have tremendous electricity needs and so on. So I think what's going to happen is with solar dropping in price, we are going to see different form factors for distributed solar that are going to really make a big difference. And once that enabling technology is in place, distributed solar, a lot of other things are possible. So for instance, I just had dinner with Bill Gates. Bill Gates has just put $60 million into toilets that don't require very complicated piping systems and so on, where you can actually have, with chemicals, sanitation, high quality sanitation and so on, right there. But to do that, you need electricity. The moment you have distributed solar, you can add some of that technology to it. Suddenly you make a certain type of sanitation much more possible. So once you put in place that distributed solar, all these other possibilities open up as well. So that's the second industry where innovation, frugal thinking, technology innovation, coupled with India's own large market, is going to result in tremendously interesting growth opportunities for industries that can only develop in India, just like they've only developed in China. And the third example I want to give is in automotive. Maruti Suzuki has already said that India could become the world's largest manufacturer of automotive vehicles. Daimler-Benz is saying that their truck manufacturing hub in India is going to be, and you might have seen that article in the Wall Street Journal, is going to be the export hub for them to all the Southeast Asian countries as well as to Africa. That's another example of where that technology-intensive, high-quality talent coupled with manufacturing that is engineering-intensive can result in a kind of industry that you can only have in India. And so when I talk about what is it that India can give the world, those kinds of industries where you couple innovation with engineering-intensive kind of solutions, those are the kinds of industries that India will do well. We are not going to become a Foxconn type, electronics manufacturing type player. We are not, because that requires supply chains, it requires low-cost land, it requires a tax regime that the Chinese have set up and so on. We are never going to replicate that. The industries that we are going to develop are going to be very different. They're going to be much more engineering intensive, which is where we have a comparative advantage, which is why medical devices, which is why distributed solar, which is why automotive manufacturing. And that's something we do bring to the rest of the world. And then the second thing that I think India will bring to the rest of the world, and I'll end here and then take questions, is I think something even more powerful than just this new set of industries that we are bringing to the table. And I can already begin to see that impact in certain parts of the world, particularly in Africa. And what I mean by that is, if in India we can get to that 7 to 8% growth rate, if we can become a $5 trillion economy, if we can generate returns for the rest of the world, if we can profitably employ a young workforce, then what we demonstrate to the rest of the world. What we demonstrate to the rest of the world, that there isn't just the China model for development, that there is another model for development. And it is, as the Prime Minister said, it's democracy, demography, and dividends, i.e. returns. So we will demonstrate that there isn't just a China model for development. We will demonstrate that there is an India model for development that is based on diversity, that is based on democracy, that is based on a different kind of innovation. And that's a very powerful message to send to the rest of the world, to show people that we don't necessarily need to have those authoritarian powers and forces to enable people to get to prosperity. We can get to prosperity by being a democracy, by giving people freedom, and making thereby a country that we can all be proud of. So I think that combination of hard and soft power, that India model, which is what I know the Prime Minister is extremely, extremely focused on and passionate about, I think that is the second thing that we can bring to the world, which is that you can get from being a very poor country to being a middle-income country, and perhaps from there going on to becoming a high-income country, because you're following a different model for development. And it is the India model, and it is a model based on democracy and diversity. So let me end there. I just wanted to give you all a sense of what it takes from the rest of the world for India's development. But as India develops, which is the more important story, what is it that India can bring to the world? I'll stop here and take questions. The lady in the back.
With the increase in your economy, do you see India importing more gold for ceremonial reasons and more silver for the manufacturing of your automobile industry?
I think it's going to be quite a natural thing for commodity consumption in India. Obviously, gold for jewelry purposes and so on, silver for industry, etc. All of that will naturally happen because those are essential elements for the economy and for the growth of consumption in India. So I think it's just but natural that if we go from a $2 trillion economy to a $5 trillion economy, that a lot of commodities will be required. And in a way, of course, we saw that with China as well. China demand is slackening, but India demand is going to grow. So we'll definitely see those trends. The gentleman there on the side.
Jayant, the question is a little more personal. Is that, when I see you speaking for last 15 minutes and you spent, 25 years, I see you very comfortable in this environment of Peary and Park Avenue. How comfortable are you now in the Hazaribagh Chaupal environment where you cannot wear any of the things that you're wearing here, and you cannot speak even a word and diction of English, and only thing that you have to speak is Mangalyan for next 15 minutes? How comfortable do you really feel in that environment?
Do you want me to give a speech in Hindi or?
No, I don't. I want the answer.
Or do you want to see it on YouTube?
No, I just want to, hear your real feelings. How comfortable are you as a Hazaribagh?
You ask a very good question, and I have a way of answering it. It's an analogy. You're a tennis player. The analogy is like you're a tennis player. And you're a pretty guy. I actually do play quite a bit of tennis. And I've played it all my life. But the fact is, you spend your entire life as a tennis player trying to get better and better and better. And you get to the point, let's imagine, that you're playing in the Grand Slams. So we just had the US Open, right? And suppose you're good enough to get to the quarterfinals of the US Open and then you lose to Roger Federer. And you spend your whole life getting there, right? And then one morning, and this is for the cricket fans, one morning you wake up in a cold sweat. 75,000 people are screaming at you because you're in Eden Gardens, which is the world's largest cricket stadium. 75,000 people are screaming at you. You're taking guard, the world's fastest bowler, bowling at 90 miles an hour, Mitchell Johnson, who's a left-arm bowler from Australia, is coming in to bowl at you. You're taking guard, you're a tennis player. You look across, on the other side, the non-striker is Sachin Tendulkar, right? Now go play cricket. So that is I said the degree of difficulty, the distance you have to travel from Harvard to Hazaribagh, if you will. Of course, the reason you can do it is because you've gone from Hazaribagh to Harvard in the first place. But that's the position I found myself in on the 15th of April, 2014, when I was giving a speech in Hindi in front of 75,000 people in Hazaribagh, live TV audience of millions of people, and the Prime Minister to be Narendra Bhai Modi sitting next to me, right? So you have to be able to make that transition. So how do you do that, right? That's another story which I won't bore you with right now. But it is entirely doable, of course. And to see the results of that journey, all you have to do is go to YouTube, and there, if you type in Modi Hazaribagh, you will actually see the speech I gave. But of course, the point is that you have to be able to drop one personality and really become somebody else. Because giving a speech in Hindi is actually very different from anything that we are doing right now. And remember, when you give, and then you have to understand this, and Prime Minister Modi is going to be giving a speech in front of 25,000 cheering people in Madison Square Garden on Sunday, on the 28th. He is the single best orator on this planet. I can tell you this with absolute certainty. Because when you give a speech in Hindi, remember, like I'm doing right now, I have no notes. I have no notes. There is no teleprompter. Nobody's written the speech. When President Obama gives a speech, he has a team of speech writers, he has speaking coaches, and he has the teleprompters in front of him. That's how he gives a speech. Prime Minister Modi just gives it extempo, just like this. So it's actually very, very hard to do it, and the way you have to do it is very, very different from the way you speak in English. But it requires you to actually become somebody else. But again, as I said, the results are on YouTube. You can see them. Thank God for YouTube. Did I answer your question? Okay. Yes, please.
Jayant, thank you for the summation for what looks like a great future. I also happen to be from an IIT, and I also happen to be a tennis player, so I share that. My question to you is, great if we could be an engineering powerhouse, but looking at the schools that we have, the systems that we have, I really question that can we do it in a reasonably short period of time, because the skill sets are still very unbaked. They give the degrees, but I don't know the competency. So I'd like you to reflect on that. Can we do it?
Well, I think we can do it is because you are there, right? The fact of the matter
I'm
is
here.
that the reason why I'm very confident it can be done is because the Indian diaspora is very strong around the world. Look at the way the IT and BPO industry flourished in India, and that is an industry I'm very closely associated with. I wrote 2 of the NASSCOM McKinsey reports myself, and it's in an industry that went in 1995-96. I was there for the Infosys IPO. Infosys IPO'd with 50 million in revenue. Today, it's a $6 billion company, $7 billion company. That entire industry was built in 15 years and has gotten to the point now where it's a $60-70 billion a year of export revenues. There are very few other industries in the world that generate $60-70 billion in exports. The Japanese automotive, which are engineering intensive. I'm not talking about resource intensive industries like oil in Saudi Arabia. But if you look around and you say, how many skill-intensive industries around the world are there that generate 60 or 70 billion in revenue, export revenues? There are very few. We did that in India in 15 years. And if we can do that in 15 years for the IT industry starting from scratch, I'm very confident that in the industries, for example, that I mentioned, distributed solar, medical devices, automotive, that it's entirely possible to do that. Many of these industries are already growing and developing, and we have a wealth of talent that we can tap into globally who can come back and contribute to that. So I have all the confidence in the world it can be done. Now, obviously, there's a lot of work to be done in our educational institutions and so on. But again, there was a time when there were very few people who were institutions that were awarding engineering degrees in India. As the IT industry grew, those engineering institutions sprang up. Not all of them are good quality, but today there are more than enough engineers to come and work in the IT companies. So I think even the skill and the talent issues will be resolved as soon as these industries begin to grow. So I'm actually very hopeful, and it's not just based on speculation, it's actually based on hard reality in terms of what we've seen in other industries. I mean, think of the generic pharma industry in India. Look at what a world beater it is today. Other questions? Yes, sir.
Excuse me. Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
What
Yes,
are the
you
challenges
have the mic.
India is going to face when it is moving from a service-oriented economy to a product? Because if in the next phase of our development, we have to be innovative and really come up with some world-class products. So as you are from IT, our mindset has been more in a service-based sort of mindset, and now we have to challenge in the next, what we see is how do we become a product-oriented economy?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very difficult transition. Of course, the IT industry in many ways is finding it very difficult to make that transition from time and materials billing to actually product-oriented business models. And of course, Vishal Sikka at Infosys is going to be dealing with all of that. But I think what we have to recognize is that India's entrepreneurial energies have been unleashed. And India is a very innovative country. As a venture capitalist, before I went into public life, I was a venture capitalist in India. And the kind of innovation that we're seeing in India, the manner in which entrepreneurs are really tackling some of these issues and challenges, and the amount of capital that's now flooding in, both in terms of global venture capital as well as both Indian venture capital as well, I think is going to enable us to be able to tackle some of these big challenges and some of these product-based innovations as well. For instance, I don't know if you're familiar with a company called InMobi. Have you heard of InMobi? InMobi is a $1 billion market cap company right now, which has a terrific online product, which is advertising. It's an advertising platform, and that is product innovation. So that's one example. I myself invested in a company. Do you all use a product called News Hunt by any chance? Okay, so News Hunt is the most successful mobile app in India right now, which is Indian, as opposed to Google and Facebook and so on, which are obviously much more popular. But right now, News Hunt, which just raised, by the way, another $20 million of funding from Sequoia, is getting about 14 million active users a month. And what it has done, and this is tremendous product innovation if you ask me, what it has done is built a phenomenal platform to render regional languages on a whole host of mobile devices. So today, if you want to read Prabhat Khabar from Ranchi, you can go to News Hunt and get all the Prabhat Khabar headlines. Now, you can do that for Malayala Manorama also, for all the regional newspapers. And the reason they've done it is because they've solved some very difficult problems of rendering, where you basically take the feed from the newspapers as they put it out, and then they basically render it on an Android app, they render it on an iOS app, etc. And Android, of course, has 7 different flavors. But they render it on all of these apps because they built the rendering technology, they built the servers that sit in the NOCs of all the different network operators so that they give you a really high-quality user experience. And they've used that platform now to sell ebooks. So if you remember those old, the railway station platform, if you went and you bought a Hindi book for 25 rupees, 5 rupees, the equivalent of that you can now get on your smartphone by using their platform. That's real product innovation. And by the way, that company is very successful in Africa as well. Coming back to my point about the kinds of industries that are going to come out of India are going to be very different from the Chinese industries. But those are the kinds of things that India is good at, and that's where we have comparative advantage, and this kind of innovation is going to happen. So I see enough evidence of this type of innovation, of these kinds of products happening in India now, that I think we are really seeing a new age. I'll give you one final example because I really love this company. Have you all traveled on Indigo by any chance? First of all, Indigo itself is innovation. I don't know if you all agree with me, but it's a terrific low-cost airline. But that I'm not going to talk about Indigo. But on Indigo, have you bought that drink that they offer called Paper Boat? Jal Jeera Aam Ras. Have you bought that? Do you like it? Don't you like it? That is an Indian startup. It's a couple of guys from Wharton that have got money, and they have come up with this tremendous product innovation where for 60 rupees, you can buy these juices and so on. So it's like affordable Nantucket nectar. 2 more questions. Okay, please. So there's a lot of product innovation happening in India. You just have to look for it.
Mr. Sinha, you're obviously very, very well spoken, and Harvard obviously echoes in what you say. Your point about traveling from Hazaribagh to Harvard really resonated for me. I myself am a boy who grew up in Dadar, Bombay, and who arrived in this country 20 years ago, and found that it was my performance in Government Law College, Bombay, that ultimately got me a job at Skadden Arps. So my own education from India played a pivotal role. I lead a corporate boutique law firm in Manhattan. And my American life started because of the excellent education I received in India. To your point about what India can bring to the world, it would seem to me that education and providing world-class education would be one such area. Because if you look around this room, very many of us have received a tremendous education in India, and we were able to leverage that now into very, very successful careers in perhaps one of the most demanding environments in the world, which is New York City. I didn't hear you identify education as an area which India can bring to the rest of the world, and I'd be interested in your thoughts on that, given your own experiences that you have spoken about. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I think that's a very intriguing point and an excellent point, of course. I would say that the education that we've received in India, probably you and I and others who are in this room have been very privileged and fortunate to have received the best possible education in India. Not everybody in India is obviously receiving such a high quality education. So are we capable of exporting that education and having people like they do from India going to the UK or the US? I think that's going to be limited. On the other hand, I think where education can help us is in precisely people like us, because we'll be exporting more people like us overseas. And of course, the remittances are a very important part of India's economy and India's capital inflows. So yes, I think it's possible as educational standards improve in India that education will be sent overseas in terms of individuals, or will be reflected, as I was saying earlier, in some of the skill-intensive industries that India is going to be good at. But education as such, as an export earner, where people from Australia are going to come and study in India, or people from Saudi Arabia are going to come and study in India, I think is probably still some ways away. I wouldn't say it's, in the next 10 years, going to be a materially important export earner for us, which is really the lens I was using. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
I'm somewhat disappointed by the answer, but I hope you change your views on that, because I think that's one area we can definitely.
Jayant, you showed a very good future for India for next 10 years. I want to pick your brains on three things. Firstly, what's the risk you see in what you spoke? Obviously, it can't be that easy, so there need to be some risk, and what are those risks? If I can prompt you on two, the first comment I would want you to make a comment is, while Mr. Modi is a very strong leader and a great guy, there's a typical comment in Indian markets that there's no strong B team in India. So you have a prime minister, and then, and I know it's slightly political sensitive, but your comments on we don't have a strong B team below Mr. Modi. And secondly, in Gujarat, Mr. Modi did a great job, and obviously he had a good majority in Gujarat, and we also had a good majority in these elections. By any chance, future elections, state elections, throw some kind of setback to BJP, will Mr. Modi be able to do what he promised, or will he have to kind of go back a bit and make sure that he is more politically, you do a few things which are, which will help you more politically and may not be that economically? So comment on these three things.
Yeah, no, those are great questions. I think if you have to consider what are the primary risks that we face in India right now, I would say the two most important risks we face, number one is external to us, because we have a very unstable neighborhood that we live in, and anything is possible. So that is obviously always a major risk factor for India. And then the second thing, of course, is key man risk, if you will, right? Because Mr. Modi is a phenomenal leader, and if something were to happen to him, then one would all worry about it. That being said, and this is the answer to your other question about the B team, I would say that you have to understand the Bharatiya Janata Party as a very meritocratic organization with a very deep bench strength. We have a number of very eminent and capable leaders. And I think we've got a terrific, not just a B team, but a B team, a C team, a D team, a E team, etc. And of course, I work closely with the party, and I can see the depth of talent that we have. If you look at 4 or 5 other prominent leaders in the cabinet, whether it is Rajnath Singh ji or Arun Jaitley ji or Sushma ji, these are all Ravi Shankar Prasad ji. I mean, these are very capable, outstanding political leaders in their own right. And so there's a tremendous depth of talent that the BJP has. But much more importantly, and I think this is an important takeaway for all of you who may not be following Indian politics that closely, you have to remember that the Bharatiya Janata Party, unlike other parties in India, is capable of institutional rejuvenation and is capable of generational change. There's no other party in India. I mean, of course, you can say dynastic succession is the way things work in the Congress. But if you look at the seamless way in which there's been a generational change right now in the BJP, where one set of leaders is now sort of more in the guidance and mentorship realm, and another set of leaders who are in their 60s now are in charge. And then we have another terrific group of people coming up in their 40s and 50s. And then you look and you see, people who are even younger, Smriti Irani and Anurag Thakur, very capable, competent people. We are generating that bench strength. We are generating a meritocratic organization that is deep and strong in all the states, which functions, in a very sort of democratic way by and large, and is therefore capable of rejuvenating and regenerating itself. That is very good for India's democracy, and I think it's going to force the other political parties, which is also important, to be similarly capable of regenerating and rejuvenating themselves. So I would say I wouldn't agree with your B. Sorry? I mean, the fact of the matter in India is that elections happen all the time, and there are always elections going on. So, you take it in your stride. You may win some, lose some, but the reality at the end of the day is that the Prime Minister is singularly focused on winning in 2019. Virtually the first thing he said to us as newly elected members of Parliament on May the 20th, when he came to Central Hall Parliament, you remember his famous speech when he knelt on the entrance of Parliament House before he came in. Virtually the first thing he said to us was that we are going to have to give an accounting of our performance in 2019, so we better start thinking about it right now. So we are all very focused on that. Last question. There, the gentleman over there.
Mr. Sinha, you asked about one of the things you mentioned that India needs is, thank you so much. Is $1 trillion in capital. And given the depth of equity market, I don't think it can, and you might disagree with it. I think India will have to develop a good debt market to attract that kind of capital. And unfortunately, there is no good bankruptcy system in India. And I don't see how debt can come into India in such a large amount unless there is a good bankruptcy system, and just wanted to get your thoughts on.
No, I think you're exactly right. And if you go back and you read Dr. Rajan's report on financial sector reform, which if I remember right came out in 2008, 6 years ago, he pretty much said exactly what you are saying. And he and others are working very hard right now to put in place, much deeper, more liquid fixed income markets in India. Of course, you know about the Maharaja bond that has just come out with the IFC. So clearly there are attempts and efforts to really deepen that market. And at the same time, there is in fact a way in which you can repossess assets and make it difficult for promoters to continue with their equity after they have become defaulters. So there are all kinds of things. Safezi is there, by the way. So there are all kinds, and the debt recovery tribunal has been put in place. So there are all kinds of measures that are slowly being put in place to make an orderly liquidation and a workout possible. That is something that will take time. I mean, my friend Nishit Desai is here, and he can speak chapter and verse about all of this as well as to how all of this is unfolding. It will take time for all of that to mature and become institutionally robust. But I can assure you, and I've spoken to the finance minister many times about this, as an excellent, if not among the best corporate lawyers in India, he understands these issues minutely well. And there's a lot of work going on right now to see what we can do to make these kinds of liquidation and bankruptcy proceedings a lot more feasible in the Indian context. All right? Thank you very much. Thank you.